Hi, everyone. Welcome to News Take. My name is David Chavrin. I'm the president and CEO of the News Media Alliance. If this is your first time joining us, News Take is where we try to dive deep into somewhat wonky conversations with people who are working to help the news industry grow and evolve, particularly on the product and innovation side. And today is certainly no exception. The phrases blockchain, cryptocurrency, Web3 get thrown a lot really wildly, and particularly in conversations these days about the future of news and content. But very often they're not used well or correctly, and often by people who really don't understand both the promises and maybe even perils behind the technology. What we wanted to do is speak to really smart, thoughtful people about what the potentials of these kind of technologies are for news and content. So today, I'm really excited to introduce our guest, Julien Genestoux. Julien is the founder and CEO of Unlock, an access control protocol built on blockchain that enables creators to monetize their content or software without relying on a middleman. He describes himself as an entrepreneur, unconditional web advocate, and, frankly, a hacker. He has built two profitable startups, one of which was Superfeeder, which became one of the leading real-time web APIs and was later acquired by Medium. At Medium, he led the company's SEO effort and quadrupled the traffic it receives from search. He co-authored the W3C web sub protocol and spoke at numerous international conferences and events. He talks about NFTs, Web3, crypto, and the open web. So you might be thinking, what does all this mean and how is it relevant to the news industry? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Julien, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And I hope I'll live up to the expectation that you've set.
Well, it's great. Let's just start with your background. Tell us, where you're from, how you got into the industry, and
Yes.
something about your sort of professional evolution over
Background.
time.
Absolutely. So I'm French. I'm a software engineer, and I actually started my career when I was still studying. I created a job board for students back in France when I was myself looking for a summer job, and I couldn't find anything online in the early 2000s. It was 2001, I think. And at the time, couldn't find anything really online, and so I'm going to create that job board myself. And I created, not really with the ambition of being something like a business, but after a couple months, and I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was less than 6 months, McDonald's or some McDonald's stores started to put job offers on the website. And for me, that's when it clicked. That's when I realized the internet is magic in many ways. Like I am literally no one in my, parents' living room on the home computer, creating a website and then publishing it without too many expectations in terms of what it would give. And then all of a sudden McDonald's, which in my students' mind or high schoolers' mind felt like the biggest company in the world, all of a sudden they started to put job offers on my website. And this is magic, not just for me, but like realizing the idea that the internet is really this permissionless platform where anyone can create value for anyone else in the world. It's not very niche, but in practice, I didn't do that with, a bank account. There's actually no business initially. I just bought the domain myself and thought it was fun. And that's really how I fell in love with the idea of the open web. In many ways.
So you were creating your own website properties, and then it had ad units, and McDonald's was placing ads.
No. It was job offers. So basically, McDonald's was coming. We didn't have ads
Yeah.
at the time. It was 2001, 2002. So no ads, and it was just like, okay, cool. I'll put a little simple form. Companies can put like their name, description of the position that they're offering, and McDonald's they're looking for staff members. They're going to sell
Yeah.
burgers or these. No very big qualification required. There are a bunch of fields like the location of the jobs, and then the submit. And once it's submitted, there's a little admin interface that it would go through and kind of look at making sure that it was actually real things. And the real, I'd hit publish, and then basically students that would come to the website would find this and be able to initially leave and apply. There was just like the phone number and the email address of the recruiter. Now there's a richer set of application forms that people can complete, but initially it was just like really kind of a very basic job board. And again, the fact that McDonald's went there for me was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like this thing that, again, not a joke, but not a real thing either in my mind, turned out to be very real and very useful to at this point, I'd say millions of students in France,
Yeah,
which is pretty cool.
fantastic. And so where did you go from there, and how did you end up where you are?
Yeah. So I was still, studying. So I decided to complete my studies first. And actually, in 2004, I was doing an exchange program in Chicago. So it was my last but 1 year of studies. And at the time, that's when AdSense launched. Google's advertisement on third-party sites launched. And I decided to play with it. And I put a little AdSense code on that job board, which was, by the way, still not a company at that point. It was still kind of like, okay, I'm going to just do this for fun. And the first month, I think we received a check of more than $5,000. And that's when I realized, like, okay, well, there is something there. Like, I could definitely build a business out of this. My dad at the time, who still access my bank account, was like, "What's going on? Where's this money coming from?" And I said, "Hey, no,
That's
this is
fantastic.
perfectly fine. This is ads coming from Google." And it was like, "Wait, no, you can't do that. Like, you need to have a business. You need to do all of these things." So, I actually went back to France after this and got a 1 year degree in doing businesses, basically. And then I incorporated that as a real business, and it still exists today. It has 5 employees. It still works as it is. But really, that was kind of the first realization of the magic of the web that allows anyone to create a little, service for someone else to use in a permissionless way. I didn't have to ask anyone's permission, make it work. If it's useful for someone else, well, that someone else is going to find it and use it. So that was really, really my experience. After this, when I was back in France, I really wanted to come back to the US after my year in Chicago and try to be in San Francisco, which was already kind of the mecca for tech. And so I applied for a French bank. The easiest way to get there was to apply for a French bank that actually had offices there and get a position there to get a visa. And so that's what I did. The visa was supposed to last 2 years. A year and a half in, I decided to create another company, and that's Superfeeder, which you mentioned in your introduction. So basically, at the time, I was using RSS feeds a lot to stay informed, and realized that there was something really interesting about RSS feeds and the idea that maybe we could subscribe to content from many, many different places on the internet and consume it in a single place. And, that was kind of the promise of, Facebook, Twitter, and these things. But I was really convinced that building it on RSS was actually the open version of that. It says, rather than actually go to a platform that acts as a middleman, as a gatekeeper that everybody has to publish content to, and then everybody has to consume content from, maybe there's a way to build a service where it's RSS, so we don't actually what's the right way? We don't require people to publish to that platform. It's just a consumption platform that allows you to consume content from media sites, obviously, but also blogs at the time. And it was 2007 and 8, so it was kind of the beginning of that era of Web 2, and really aggregate all of that information in a single place. And so I focused on RSS, realized there was no good API for this, and that's how the idea of Superfeeder came out. It was like, can we build an API for RSS feeds that allow people to consume companies, should I say, because it's an API, to consume and publish content in real time via RSS
That's
feeds.
fantastic. We're gonna explore Unlock in some detail later on. But by the way, I love, as a dad myself, I love your dad's reaction of, "Hey, where'd this money come from?" And B, you got to pay taxes and stuff. Like, it's,
Yep.
that's
Oh,
fantastic.
honestly, that was exactly his reaction. It's like, this is not how it works. And he was kind of horrified is a big word, was like worried. Like, you need to, this internet thing, maybe it's magic, but it's also scary. You need to start thinking more about what you're doing here.
So that's a great segue into talking about our topic today, which is, blockchain technology and applications. And I do have to tell you that I tend to get frustrated when you start to enter into conversations about the technology behind blockchain or distributed ledger, and inevitably you go to the initial use cases, which again I view as kind of strange and narrow in their own way, but they subsume the discussion. Again, the first and biggest being currency. That there's blockchain is going to be used to create entirely new systems of currency, and then we've had recently the whole evolution of NFTs, particularly around various kinds of artwork. And I get that those are use cases, but they tend to be ones that completely dominate the discussion, and it's hard for people to think beyond that. So I don't know. So I do tend to get a little frustrated
Yeah,
with that we
I
talk
mean,
about currency and
I, de-
cartoons.
I definitely understand and feel some of the same frustration. However, I want to kind of remind you how the web started. If you look at, like, at this point, it's kind of a long time ago, but like if you look at these kind of news snippets that we get from time to time of people presenting the internet in the mid 90s to late 90s, oftentimes it was kind of the same concept. Like, wait, is this just going to be about, I think there was a big scandal around, in France at least, around people finding neo-Nazi artifacts on stores, on online stores. And yes, obviously that's not what the internet is about, but that was kind of, in the early days, people, it was marginalized people that use these technologies from the get-go, like people that are on the sides. And so they're doing things that the mainstream people are not necessarily used to as much or don't necessarily accept. And I think the currency aspect is definitely there. And it's not just currencies, right? It's kind of doomsday currencies. It's a lot of the people in the crypto space are thinking about these. And this
Yeah.
is weird, but at the same time, it's also coming from this kind of cypherpunk world. It's also coming from, obviously, the alt-right people that really want to kind of live in their own island by themselves, not understanding that's actually the opposite of what blockchain and crypto are in practice, because they're networks, and so you need other people to work with if you want to collaborate on these things. And NFT and artists, like, after 20 plus years on the web, it's pretty clear that artists have been left aside in many ways of that discussion. And NFTs represent for the first time an opportunity for them to kind of build new kind of arts, new kind of things on the internet altogether, and on top of that, actually make money from this, which again is fairly, I don't say unique, but a big change compared to a lot of the existing stuff on the web at this point.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It is, the topic right now anyway does get dragged around by these other use cases, but that doesn't mean basically that won't evolve, right? And that's exactly what you're trying to do at Unlock.
Absolutely right. It starts in the, I mean, the analogy that I take all the time, I don't know if it's the best one. It's also kind of the idea of a forest versus a golf course. Like, if you think about Facebook, obviously it's a golf course. Like, everything is very well polished and fine, and there is no, the grass is perfectly kind of aligned. Everything is just pixel perfect in many ways. But that's also not how the web works. Like, the web is in itself very much like a dark forest. It's kind of a bit gross in some places, and weird mushroom smell in places. And we know
It's
there's
great.
a dead deer in some corner, but also beautiful, talk about mushrooms, like the best mushrooms are also there. Like, if you find them and you know how to hunt for them. And then in the end, that's also where you have the moss birds chirping in the trees. And so it really is kind of this difference between the well cleaned up, polished world of Facebook, which, I mean, in many ways lacks creativity and lacks kind of a bit of wilderness in many ways, and again, the forest, which, yes, is scary and has a lot of weird things going on, but also where you find the best gems, and some of the interesting things happening on the web in many ways.
Great. So let's start with some introductory discussions in terms of, some of the folks listening won't have much core understanding about what the blockchain technology really involves, right?
Yes.
And trying to, one of the things I've been trying to figure out is what's a good mental model for somebody new to the space to think about what a blockchain is. Frankly, in my mind, I always think of the world's longest Excel spreadsheet at some level.
It's not a bad way to think of this. It's just a bit limited in many
Yeah.
ways. The way to think of this, more than the longest spreadsheet, I'd say it's kind of a public database where anybody can write their own. And I guess we're going back to spreadsheets, but like their own, formulas in the cells and in the value. So everybody can create their own sheets, if you want, or their own views and their own data, then can be used by anyone else or applied by anyone else. And obviously, it started with cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin is the first one. And think of this as kind of a very basic ledger. It's like, okay, cool, we know how much money everyone owns, and if you want to transfer money from your account, you need to cryptographically sign that, because the ledger itself will refuse to update unless you have cryptographically signed it. And so in practice, that means that every user is in charge of their private key in that scenario, and only them can update data, which is kind of a big change versus the existing web infrastructure, where if I publish something, I'm not going to say Facebook all the time, but if I publish something on, on Twitter, well, Twitter can very well remove it because it's actually their job and their duty. I do think that there's a world in which it might be interesting to think of, is there a way to create these, again, public ledgers, public goods? We should talk about this at some point, but like infrastructure that anyone can write to, and only them can prove that they return it, obviously, but can alter it or change it later. And so to me, that's really one of the interesting promises of that. And it's not so much about censorship resistance. I'm not necessarily a big fan of like, oh, anybody can say whatever they want in that there's no censor. It's about the permissionless innovation. It's the idea that it's not just about speech, but it's about code, and it's about the idea of doing something interesting. So let's going back to the analogy of the gold course. Like for the longest time, if you wanted to post an image on Facebook, it has to have certain characteristics. And maybe I'm a creator and I actually only create very wide or very tall images. Well, you know what? They don't belong on the platform, which is kind of a frustration, because as a creator, that's actually how I do my art. YouTube has an optimal video duration, which is kind of an aberration if you think about this. Like as a creator, should I optimize for the medium, or should I actually try to do the work that reflects the message that I'm passing more? And optimizing for the medium obviously has a tendency to make everything look the same and behave the same. And to me, that's one thing that I don't like about the platforms, is the fact that they normalize everything in ways that in the end are not very creative.
So let's move to the applications to content. So again, public database, which has rules around how it can be updated. But once it's updated, it is updated out there, and verifiable. And the first use cases that people think about are currency. Saying that I own this currency, and then it's been updated that I've transferred so much to Julien, and then he transferred that to somebody else, all in an updated public database. That is the large public repository for a lot of one-to-one transactions and interactions. And on top of that, you can build concepts about transferring rights. This gets into the whole smart contracts thing, right?
Exactly right.
If X happens, I will pay Y, and that gets locked into the
escrow contract or something. Yes,
exactly.
No, absolutely.
So
I was going to say another way to think about these actually is something that I try to pitch all the time. I mean, a lot, because I think it may resonate more than trying to go in the infrastructure. See, the web, everybody knows HTTP code 404. HTTP code 404 is page not found. That's what you type in your browser. If you type a random URL that actually doesn't exist, you'll end up seeing that page. If you think about this, there's actually many more error codes. There's 401, 403, which you probably are familiar with, forbidden access, and things like this. There's another one called 402, and 402 is called payment required. And what's interesting about that one is, like, if you look at the HTTP specification, so the very complete specification that the WTC or IETF actually publishes out there, you'll see that it still says reserved for later use. So even though it is, in 93, they thought about the idea of building monetization on the web, from the get-go, they pushed it to later, saying, we don't know how to do this, we'll push it to later. And my big belief is that is in many ways the original sin of the web. That's actually what took us from monetizing at the protocol level to monetizing at the upper level, which is ads and attention driven. And I think in many ways, the web right now is sick of its business model. It's sick from the fact that we optimize everything for attention. When I said a couple of minutes about the platforms having an optimal, video duration time on YouTube, well, that's because that's the one that actually brings more money through ads. That's the one that actually has the best ratio of ad per content. That's the one that people tend to, click more or move on to the next video after. And so basically we're optimizing everything for attention because it's the core business model. What blockchain brings us here, it's actually the ability to think about alternative business models. It brings us the ability to think about other ways to say, okay, cool, who owns what piece of content, how it is owned, who gets access to what, and do that in a transparent protocol way rather than platform-owned way. Does that make a bit of sense as well?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a great segue into what I want to talk about regarding the applications to content.
Yes.
Again, because I think people have at least read enough about currency existing and being transferred. The other thing people are probably generally aware of is the whole evolution or early growth of the NFT
Yes.
market. I was going to try not to talk about Board Ape Yacht Club, but I mean, I guess you can't avoid it. But you know, how should somebody think about the application of a public database like this to content, the
Yes.
creation of content, the distribution of content, the monetization of content?
Absolutely.
How do you make that jump?
Yeah, so maybe let's not talk about NFTs yet. But one thing that I
Mm.
deeply believe is happening on the web, and again, I always go back to the web because for me, blockchain is not a, it's not a goal. It's a means to an end. It's really a way to again change how the web is monetized in many ways. My conviction is like we're moving away from the attention-driven economy to what I call the membership-driven economy. And we all know of Patreon that actually is something where you support your favorite creators and not, they're not paid on how much time you spend on the website. They're paid on how much you pay them on a monthly basis. New York Times and many other websites are very successful with paywalls. They say, you know what, people are going to pay us $10, $12, $15 a month to access the content, and that's a membership. Netflix is another example of this, even though these days they're struggling a little bit, but it's another example of this. So Amazon Prime is another example of this. Medium, the publishing platform that acquired my previous company, is an example of this. So everybody is moving toward memberships, and so I think that's actually a great news. It's a way to say, you know what, instead of optimizing for attention, now we're going to optimize for value creation that we do for our members. Now let's go back to blockchain. If you think about all of these membership, they all work in different ways. And more importantly, they're all stuck on the platforms that they exist in. If I'm a musician on Patreon, well, my membership contract is actually, the terms of service of Patreon. And the member status of people in my community is actually stored in the Patreon database. My conviction is for a healthier ecosystem around membership, we need to normalize them. We need to make them work the same across the web. So I don't have to create accounts everywhere. I don't have to put email and password everywhere. I don't have to put my credit card number everywhere. So they should work the same. But also, ideally, they are not tied on any specific platform. It's the idea that if I'm a member of a specific community, of a specific creators community, then I'm a member of that community anywhere I am online. It doesn't have to be just on Patreon or just on Facebook or just on Instagram. It's that relationship should exist everywhere so that as a creator, as an artist, I can follow that person wherever they are on the web. And if they start to publish content on TikTok, I can access it even though I'm a member from YouTube, if you want, rather than actually be in this kind of very siloed version of the web where every creator is stuck on a specific platform. I think it's the same for news and media. If I'm a subscriber to New York Times, when I listen to the Daily, they should know that Daily is the New York Times podcast. I think everybody knows, but I'm stating the obvious just to make sure. They should know that I'm a subscriber to the New York Times. And rather than actually tell me the best way to support the Daily is to become a subscriber to New York Times, they could say thank you or provide me with some extra content because I'm one of these members. So it really is the idea that the membership status itself should be wide open. And for me, that's where blockchain is interesting because it provides the ability to build these infrastructure that are shared by everyone, accessible by everyone, but also not stuck on any specific application.
So just to play that out a little bit, you and we'll get into unlock next.
Yes.
But you think about the blockchain as the layer where I can say I am a supporter of the New York Times.
Yes.
And that's embedded in that database.
It's public knowledge in some way, yeah.
And then the specific applications are essentially built on top of that,
yes.
right? I can access New York Times content in a lot of places, but you're assuming that the Times is then referring back to that public database, about my membership and
so basically, yeah, exactly right. So now when I go to the New York Times website, the New York Times website could say, okay, cool, please, Julien, log in. I would log in. They either find that I'm logging in with my credentials, email and password, or I expose my crypto wallet. And when I say expose, I just give them the address. I say, hey, this is me. I am this specific address. Now they can verify inside of the database if I have a legacy membership, or they can check on the blockchain and say, okay, cool. Does Julien address have a membership? If Julien does have a membership, okay, cool, we'll serve the full content. So they can do that on their website, but more importantly, Flipboard could do that as well. So Flipboard is still around, this application that people use to syndicate content. Flipboard, when they show me content from New York Times, could easily verify that indeed, if I show them my wallet address, I have a membership to the New York Times. And in that scenario, show me maybe the full content article, the full length article. And what's interesting about this, they don't actually have to implement a custom API for New York Times and then one for Washington Post and then for Wall Street Journal. It is, all of these would be in my version of the web, public ledgers in that way that are accessible in a standard way. They work the same across any publication. And so I could also use this to access your blog, or, and then I would easily be able to identify myself and prove, and we'll talk about the privacy implication maybe, but prove that I have a membership without having to, share passwords between all of these applications.
And the implication in that, interestingly, is then if you look at it from the publisher's perspective, what they'd be most interested in is that you have a membership, an economic relationship with them, as indicated in the blockchain.
Yes.
And then that presumably opens up a lot of flexibility regarding that customer-facing layer, right? Because
exactly right.
There's a lot of, you become it's economically much more advantageous to have the content consumed in a lot of different ways because the exchange has been underneath locked into the blockchain layer. Is that a good way to think about it?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, the way to think about this is these entitlements is like, now the entitlement is something that is, acquired. I mean, acquired is known, and now each of these application, when you say on top of it, it's actually not on top of it, right? It's like websites. It's like a normal website could hook into that and say, okay, cool. I know that Julien is a member, so I'm going to show him the features and that are members only, and so maybe that's the full content. Maybe that's some extra content. Maybe that's, some features inside of the application like dark mode, or I mean, for news media, I don't know what that could be. Or maybe the comment section becomes open because Julien is a paying member. Maybe, I mean, one thing that a lot of people subscribe to Medium for is for the green halo around their avatar. It's the same idea. Like, now the website can easily identify that a given visitor, without this visitor having to create accounts, is indeed a paying member or not. And if they are, serve them or treat them as members. What's even more interesting is like, this goes beyond the website. Like, you can think, okay, maybe we're organizing events. You know what? Rather than actually go check in the database of the website for every attendee if they actually have an up-to-date membership, I can ask people to show me their members card at the venue, and we'll talk about the fact that the members card is an NFT, but when they show up on their phone, they can show the members card, and if that members card is indeed valid, then I can let them in. And so I know a lot of media organizations are organizing events. That's a very easy way to kind of share the member status between, again, a web app and the physical world in that scenario.
So let's dig into Unlock.
Yes.
Talk about what you're trying to create, how it fits into what we talked about, and sort of where you are in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So Unlock is a protocol for memberships. It's an easy way for creators, publications, brands even, to create a membership contract and then sell NFTs as memberships, non-fungible tokens. You may say, what's the relationship between Bored Apes, as you mentioned earlier, and Unlock? Well, I do think that non-fungible token itself is a primitive, in the same way that a website is a primitive. And eBay has nothing to do with my blog. These are very different websites, but they're using the same concept of a website. And I think NFTs are the same. There's going to be very, very different types of NFTs. There are NFTs that are like Bored Apes, with the culture that they carry. But there's also going to be NFTs that are representation of some unique things. My big bet is like members card are actually very well represented as NFTs. And when I say members card, is your gym membership could actually be, is a members card. You have it in your wallet and could be an NFT. What's interesting about this, it's an NFT because it now is, an NFT is something that is both digital and tangible. It's something that is digital, so I can use it inside of software, which is really, really practical to access content. I don't have to actually have email and password. I can easily show my members card anywhere I go on the web of the gym, but also something that is tangible that I can actually show on my phone, for example, in a way that's unique and know that nobody can tamper with it, or nobody can copy it. My members card is mine, and you can't really show my members card to people because you are not me in that scenario. Makes sense? So that's what Unlock is, a protocol for membership that allows creators to deploy their membership contract and then sell memberships in the form of NFTs. One misconception about NFTs also is like they're forever. Yes, some of them are forever, and the one that you mentioned earlier are, but they could also very well have an expiration date in the same way that your gym membership has an expiration date. And so that's what Unlock offers. It offers creators the ability to create membership NFTs that are valid for a day, a week, an hour, a second, a month, a year, a decade. It's really up to the creator. And what's interesting about that, they also have the ability to be automatically recurring, exactly like your normal membership. So you say, okay, cool, I'm a creator, I'm going to create a month-long membership that's going to renew every 30 days automatically. If the user is not approved for the renewal, well, their membership is going to expire and they won't be able to access the content anymore. But in practice, if they have approved to this, their wallet is being charged automatically every month for the total duration of the approval that they've made.
So let's tie this back to publishers of content. Not
Yes.
obviously, I represent people who do journalism,
Yep.
create, and journalism is an interesting and unique kind of content. But again, we is essentially paying people to
Provide
produce
information. Yep.
high quality professional content that people want and need. But there are other people who create other kinds of content.
Yep.
So look at it from the world of a publisher. If
Yeah.
you start with one of my members, and talk a little bit about again, elaborate on sort of an application to somebody who, for example, creates journalism. How
Yeah,
might you
absolutely.
think about that?
So first of all, I'd say right now there is a pretty bad misalignment between the goal, which is to create high value information, and the reward, which is how these people are getting paid. Right now, if we're looking at attention, they're being paid not so much in terms of how valuable the content that they create is, but how much attention it can grab, which sometimes is the same, but most time is not the same. And that's how you end up with what I call the attention economy, where we're talking more about the thing that makes us upset or outrages us, rather than the actual valuable, insightful thing that would actually benefit society. And so that, for me, is kind of a given. Like, we have a pretty bad issue around business models, like how we make money as publishers and how in news publishers specifically, and what we're trying to achieve. And in that world, unfortunately, that means that the content that is able to gather the most attention, which is not necessarily the most accurate, probably not the one that is the most factual, unfortunately, is the one that actually gets the more money. And that economic imbalance, I think, is a big issue right now, and it's, in my mind, even getting worse. Now, moving to membership is a way to say, okay, cool, you're a media publisher, you're a news organization, you work for a community, whether it's a large one like the whole United States, or a local community if you're a local newspaper, or a specialized community in if you're an industry specialized magazine. You have this community, and the idea that this community, since you work for them by creating content for them, the idea that they would be the customer, for me, is one way to solve that problem. It's like, okay, I live in New York City. If I want to get the most accurate New York City information, I would pay for the people that are actually going to be the journalists that are going to provide me with the best information. I'd rather do that rather than be constantly bombarded with advertisements where I know that the journalists are being paid not so much by how much value they create for me, but how much value they create for the advertisers. And to me, that's kind of the issues. So again, the idea of moving to membership is one that it's pretty obvious in my mind. The challenge, though, is like right now, these memberships, it's hard to build from a technical perspective. As a creator, as a publisher, I have to create user accounts. Most of them actually don't. We worked with Forbes.com about 3 years ago now. At the time, they didn't have user accounts for readers. They had a contributor account, but readers didn't have user accounts. And so the idea of creating membership was like, okay, first we have to create these user accounts, which is kind of a big endeavor. Then you have to create all of the infrastructure around payments. Okay, creating kind of ways to capture credit cards, maintain that credit card database up to date when credit card expires and things like this, and then charge every month all of that's a big deal. That's a lot of work. My conviction is like, if we normalize that, we actually can make it really, really easy. And that's the point of protocols. If you think about creating a web page, I don't say it's trivial, but it's much easier than creating a native application. And that's what we're talking about here. Like, the goal is to make it so that it's all memberships are like web pages. Basically, anyone can easily
Mhm.
create one, rather than have developers work heavily to create that membership. So that would be the next thing. And then if you think about this, I think also one thing that works really well in the news world is the idea of partnerships. Is the idea that some content might be syndicated from a website to another one, or the same article might be published by multiple outlets. I do think here the idea that the membership itself could be something that is bundled is quite interesting. It's like you can say, okay, cool. Um, the AP has an overarching membership. It's, I don't know, I give you a random example, like $10 a month, $12 a month. That gives you access not only to the content on the AP website, but to the content that is coming from all of the publications that are members of the AP in that scenario. Or the News Media Alliance could have a membership, people pay, and then they get access not just to the News Media Alliance content, which actually might be not that much content, but to all of the publications that are part of the alliance in that way. So kind of creating that bundle lowers the friction. Now it means that as a user, I don't have to pay for all of these independently. I can pay for one and know that no matter what, the content that I'm going to read is being supported by my contribution rather than just the advertisers optimizing for my attention.
This is maybe a little sideways question. One of the challenges that publishers currently have is, particularly in textual content, is a feeling of you lose control of you create an expensive thing that's valuable, and it zooms out and you lose distributional control, and it's hard to go find everywhere where it's being consumed, and you know get a return
Yeah.
on that consumption in a lot of places. Uh, Talk a little bit about whether you think blockchain could also be a means
Yes.
to
Attribution.
identify your content
Yep.
and be able to follow it wherever it goes, and increase, frankly, it's not just monetization, but monetization's a
Is a big
thing.
one. Yeah.
At least know where it goes, and have productive engagements with people wherever it goes.
Yeah, so it's a question of attribution. There's a couple of projects. One of them was is called Poet, whose goal was to basically say, okay, when somebody publishes a piece of content, they can notarize it in some way on a blockchain in a way that now anyone who wants to syndicate that content can verify where it's coming from and who actually published it initially, and maybe share the revenue or share the profits from that. Because one of the problem of these kind of syndication aspects, like you lose track of where the content is coming from, and in practice that's actually pretty bad for journalism, because you also lose the credibility of that content. Like sometimes you realize, like, okay, this thing was actually not really a very valuable piece, but we published it because it's coming from that stream that we trust. Using the blockchain here for attribution could actually solve that, or help solve that, where you kind of understand where is content coming from and how it floats between different entities. And you're right, it's not just about the money, it's really about the shared infrastructure. I think when we talk about blockchain here, we're talking about something that is too specific. I'd like to frame that in the context of what we call Web3, which is something that people have pretty heard of. It's really kind of this movement that tries to go back to a more, I don't say pure because it's always a very loaded term, but like the original vision of the web, which is one that is built around protocols and not platforms. If you think about today's web, it's very much platform driven. It's the Google platform, the Facebook platform, the Apple platform, the Amazon platform. Like it feels like these people own our experiences online. But that was kind of the opposite of the initial web. Like if you remember about the late 90s, early 2000s, it was all about these protocol like HTTP, FTP, SMTP for emails. So it was like not something where any platform had control over this. It was kind of collaborating through the fact that they use standard protocols for the data to flow. I do think that one of the big efforts of Web3 is actually to go back to that world. It's to go back to a world where there is protocols that allow us to monetize via membership, and that's what Unlock does. But there's also protocols that allow you to store the content in a permissionless way on not on the blockchain, obviously, but on a file storage called IPFS, and that may be something that you guys have heard of. There is protocols around encryption where you say, okay, cool, this content is stored for everyone to access. We'd love to encrypt it so that we know you can make sure that only some people have access to this. And that's a protocol called Let protocol. There is protocols for, let me think of another good example, for video streaming. So it's the idea that, okay, rather than have the video go through a specific provider, it can actually be streaming from a place, and it would be more for visual journalism like TV or such, but streaming from a place to another using protocol rather than kind of be stuck in kind of an opaque way instead of some platform that might alter the data in one way or another.
It's really interesting. A lot of the discussion also often goes to these places of individual creators. People talk a lot about individual creators connecting with audiences, which I totally get. What are the challenges? And I don't think it's a big conceptual leap, but I don't believe that reporting, most forms of journalism, are really individual endeavors. There's a lot of writing that can be individual, a lot of opinion analysis. I get that, but reporting, collecting facts, is capital intensive. Frankly, yep. It could take a long time. You need somebody to create the capital. There's editing, legal. There's other things to it.
Yep.
Just like, for example, a Hollywood movie is never an individual endeavor, right? Yep. There's not somebody there who's holding the lights and the camera and does the editing and does the distribution, right? So I think in the journalism space, there's always going to be a need and demand
for teams and
for publishers.
Yes.
Grouping.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that is just a kind of creator, right? I mean, it is
exactly right. I was going to say this. Like, the individual creator is not an individual person. An individual creator is one brand in some way, like one name, and things are being published under that name. Whether that name is a person's name or a company's name, I do think that it actually, I don't say is irrelevant, but it applies to both things. The New York Times for me is a creator. It's kind of a weird way to frame this for most people, but it's a creator that actually has many, many creators, editors and journalists that work for the creator. What's interesting about this is, like, there's kind of multiple levels. You can imagine a scenario where, as a creator, I have my own branding and I have my own 1,000 true fans that are people paying just for my content wherever I publish on my blog. But I might publish in New York Times, and I might say New York Times, hey, okay, cool, I'm publishing there. Please, of course, I'm going to be under the New York Times membership. So only the New York Times member are going to be able to read my content. But also, please give access to my own members as well. So the one that are not New York Times members, just members of my community, because that's part of the service that I want to give them. And what's interesting here for the New York Times is now it becomes a way to also acquire members for their own membership, because maybe someone is going to read an article from me on that platform and realize, oh, cool, there's something else that's interesting. I'm going to become a New York Times subscriber as well. So it's really the idea that a given publisher can have multiple tiers of memberships for themselves, but also can have ways to cross-pollinate, I'd say, with other memberships in that scenario. I want to go back to the point that you make about, because it's kind of a Web3 point as well, about like the fact that it's team. One of the things that people have heard about is maybe the concept of DAOs, distributed autonomous organization. So it's basically, the way to think of this is, it's an internet native organization. It's not a corporation. It's not it's not a church. It's not a nation. It's not an army. It's not a family. It's a new kind of organization, internet native. Basically, it's happening through the use of the internet. Sometimes people call that a shared bank account, a crypto wallet, a multi-sig wallet where multiple people have access to, or a governor contract that actually holds some funds and allow people to vote. But it really is a way for multiple people to collaborate. And I do think that the idea of a publisher being a DAO is an interesting one. It's basically a place where all of the journalists kind of have a say, collectively own, kind of a corporative in some way, the brand under which they all publish in that scenario. I know some journalists, are working in this kind of settings, but I think to me it's an interesting idea of leveraging the open web and Web3 in that scenario to say, okay, cool. The New York Times might be collectively owned by its investors, obviously, but also by the journalists themselves, and have kind of new ways of working in that scenario.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Getting back to, I have to tell you what I hope and dream for. One of the things I really want for my members, news publishers, is optionality, right? In the sense that currently in the platform universe, there's a very concentrated access to your content, right? People get to your content through just a couple of different companies that control a lot about that experience and take a lot of the value. The understanding that I believe we produce high quality content that's of value to a lot of people the best way, I think, ultimately to get good sustaining return on that is to, as a publisher, whether you're an individual, whether you're a company, whether you're a DAO, is to be able to have your ability to choose where your content is or how it's consumed and where, and get some optionality as a way to sort of
How it's monetized as well. Yeah.
maximize the opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And so this gets to your earlier point about if you can get to levels of protocol as opposed to platforms,
Yes.
what you then can build is a bunch of different options.
Yes.
And not just be locked into the platforms that
A
have been
monolith
imposed
platform.
on you.
Yes, a monolithic platform. Like one of the challenges of platforms is like they do everything, which sometimes is great, but at the same time reduces the opportunity a lot.
Yeah. Well, this is Julien. This is super fascinating. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. A couple of closing questions I have for you in terms of what you see in the space about content. Could be NFTs. Hey, frankly, it could be Bored Ape. What have you seen recently that you thought was really innovative and it really excited you? What are some of the things that you were like, whoa?
I mean, the thing we do at Unlock obviously is something that I'm excited about. The fact that we do recurring things is something that is really, really wow. Like we're the only one able to do that, and we do that in a decentralized way, which I think is fascinating. Generally, I'm an engineer, so I'm really fascinated by technical progresses and innovations. One thing that I really think is really interesting is the idea that NFTs again are these primitives. They're not the Bored Apes. An NFT is a thing that Bored Apes use to build themselves, but it's just one way. One thing that I think is really interesting is the idea of thinking of the NFT as something that is dynamic, something that evolves and represents the relationship. So my gym membership card is kind of always the same piece of plastic in my wallet. It doesn't actually change. But if it was digital, if it was kind of software based, it could have very interesting characteristics in terms of like how it evolves. Maybe I haven't been to the gym in a couple of days, it becomes red. It's like it shows like, okay, cool, you need to go there. It kind of evolves based on my relationship with the gym. So think of a newspaper, right? You say, okay, cool. I haven't read an article in a long time. My NFT itself would point me to one that is relevant in that scenario. The representation, it's the representation, sorry, of the relationship. And the idea that it's dynamic then is something that I think is really, really interesting and underexplored. And I would definitely try to think more about things on that front.
Fantastic. So just a piece of advice for somebody who's a content creator who wants to start thinking about whether there's applications here. What's one piece of advice? And then I think what you're doing at Unlock is really fascinating. Tell people how to get in touch with you. We'll certainly put it in the notes, but one piece of advice, and then how people can learn more about Unlock.
Piece of advice, I'd say stay skeptical. Skeptical not
Fantastic.
Just about the blockchain itself, but about the commentaries on the blockchain. Like obviously, we're seeing a ton of stuff happening. A lot of it is it's the very thin layer on top of a very thick cake, and there's a ton of really, really interesting things. So stay skeptical. Like don't buy in on all of the hype, but also try to remain curious and actually go dive in deep in things. I'm deeply convinced that the way to actually experience this, to learn about these things, is actually experience them. Like download a crypto wallet. Maybe buy a couple dollars, say dollars, not hundreds or not thousands of dollars for sure, like worth of cryptocurrency, and then unlock a membership. I do have a membership on my blog. It's $5 a year. You don't have to go that, but like that's one example of thing that you can use. Like, okay, cool, I'm going to explore with these very simple things. So again, skeptical, but at the same time, be curious and be willing to experiment. If you're interested in experimenting with crypto and memberships, and feel free to reach out to us at Unlock. You can find us on the web at unlock-protocol.com. You can find me with Julien51 pretty much anywhere on Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn. I think that would work. All of that. Again, come visit the Unlock community. We have a pretty vibrant community of creators. Some of them are actually media organizations. We raise money from The Guardian to give you a little bit of context on why I think what we do is actually very applicable to journalism in that scenario.
Fantastic. Julien, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. We'll do it again.
Absolutely. I'm definitely excited to do it again, and really looking forward to hearing some feedback on that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of
Take
course.
care.